Okay, so we are live, and I am going to be chatting with my friend Anahita on today's live. We're just going to wait for her to pop up here so I can add her. And hey, what's up? There's Anahita. Anahita just asked to join in. What's up, homie? Anahita, la, la, welcome to the live room. Yay!
Hi!
Hi! And we got Rafi here too. He's down there saying,
Ooh!
hola!
Hola!
We're like truly in the new realms of existence, like
Mm.
digitally interconnecting.
Mm-hmm.
What's up? It's good to see
Yeah.
your beautiful face, my love.
Same here. Gosh, I
Yeah,
miss you so much. So good to
I
see
know.
you.
It's good to see you too.
Yeah. Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just take the reins. And do we ever think, I just want to stop for a second, we have so many horse analogies, like even like our cars are horsepower, like you're gonna take the reins. Just like was thinking about that as I'm saying that, like, okay, go lead them into battle, take the reins, nada. But actually we're not here to discuss battle. We're actually here to discuss more about like resolving the inner battle and the inner
Mm.
conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And Anahita has been really, well, I'm going to let you speak a little bit to your own personal experience, but I've known her for many, many years, and I've seen her go through her own process and her own healing I've learned so much listening to you tell about your story,
Mm.
Anahita, and maybe you'll be open to sharing that with everyone because I think it's
Mm.
really important for people to hear, especially for those of us who have grew up in America and have been given a lot of luxuries and not
Mm.
necessarily aware of other people's experiences on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, she has really dedicated herself to healing and understanding the process of trauma in the body. And I've watched you do it in your own life. And, we
Mm-hmm.
all have different levels of trauma, on some level, like no matter where we came from, no matter how intense, if we came from a war-torn country similar to you, or if we just had an experience with our parents growing up that maybe startled us consistently and
Mm-hmm.
patterned itself into the nervous system. As we move into becoming conscious beings, it's almost, I would say that it is, you can only get to a certain level in your consciousness without actually understanding your anatomy and the hardware we have, like as human beings, our hardware, which is our central nervous system, our muscles and our body and how everything works, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that. And then there's the software, which I think of as more as like the mental programming and the loops and how we talk to ourselves. And you've really taken so much time to understand that. So while we're here talking with everyone, I'm going to, create, again, I'm really into language. So first I'm like, I want to squeeze all the yummy juices out of you. I'm like, but no, I want to cultivate them so that they
Mm.
overflow and can be shared with all of us.
Mm.
So everyone, welcome Anahita.
Mm.
Yay.
Thank you, dear sister. It's so good
Yeah.
to be here. And hello to your audience. Lovely to meet y'all. And thank you for creating this space and your dedication to ushering in consciousness and really from a place of expansion and love and unity and groundedness. And I really appreciate your consistent challenge of the status quo, whether it's in our minds or in our cultures and in our societies. I'm just like always appreciative of that. So thank you for holding the light in that way. Um,
I
so a
love
little bit about, yeah. So, fun fact, Nada had a lot of influence on how I laugh. So you definitely have. Like you helped me free my laughter and just like be like, I can't actually just laugh in the way that it's just coming through me. So that's another like a little precious gift of Nada that I carry with me is just like emancipating the feminine laughter.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, a little bit about me. My background, I come from Iran. I was born and raised there. And for those of you that are not familiar with the
Wait,
history, yeah.
Anahita, Do you have a microphone on?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
I think
Oh.
your earring is hitting against your microphone.
Oh, okay. Here. How
So,
about that? It's like that should be
yeah,
better.
perfect. Okay, go for it. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yes.
correcting that. So, I come from Iran, born and raised. And for those of you that are not familiar with the history, when I was a little girl growing up, it was right after the revolution, which, tore the country apart in many ways, and then the war. And then following that, it's just being a woman growing up in an oppressive, patriarchal society. It was a lot, and we learn to adjust. And this is what happens whether we grow up under those repressive cultures or we grow up under different kinds of societal, cultural, or economic hardships. That what happens is that we learn to adapt. There are different ways that we adapt to those changing circumstances around us to survive. And it took me so long to unpack that, having gone through all that experience, then being a refugee. So I lived in a
So
refugee
can I
camp.
can I pause you because I know that this is your story and you've told it a
Yeah.
lot, but
Yeah.
you in the times that you've told it to me, there are things that you have shared with me that I don't want you to actually gloss over because I
Mm,
just in one sitting with you when you really told me what it was like for you growing up as a young woman in Iran and then
hmm
also the process of coming over with your family as refugees, those stories blew my mind. One of the things I was actually sharing with someone was about as a woman, if you wouldn't
mm,
mind speaking just a little bit. So people really, I don't think most people, unless they've taken the time to study, do not understand, right? Or we
mm,
haven't been exposed to that over here in some of the Western countries. Like, I remember you telling me that you weren't even really allowed to smile. Like, as a woman, you're not allowed to express emotion. Or can you speak a little
mm.
bit to that, or like how you're allowed to like actually be in public? I think without permission of your
Yeah.
parents and all these different things. Can you give us a little bit more insight
Yeah.
into that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty intense process actually. So, culturally speaking, the culture itself is, more of a modesty culture. But within that modesty culture, the background, there's a lot of music. When you look at the history of Sufism, there's a lot of music and dance and expression, even in that space of modesty. But following the revolution, a lot of that was outlawed. Like you could not, as a woman, be very expressive. So, expressing yourself in any shape or form, whether it was through laughter or, through putting on a beautiful makeup, even though we had to all be covered, or wearing colors, even in that covering, was like this thing that you stand out. And you should not be standing out. You should just be invisible. So there's this culture of making women invisible. And that was the experience. It was just so powerful to just grow up in an environment that's constantly trying to curb your expression. And so you can't speak, you can't vocalize. I mean, there were things I couldn't study. I couldn't study law, politics. There are all these things I couldn't even go to school for because they're closed to women. So I was blessed to grow up in a very progressive family that always gave me the books to read, told me I could do whatever I wanted, I would be whoever I wanted. So I did have a lot of beautiful upbringing from my family. But when you step outside, it's like there's a whole lot that you cannot do. It's like even if you're walking with confidence, even not smiling, no makeup, I was stopped for walking with confidence at the university, and but was told like, oh, you're walking like your dad owns this property, you're not allowed to walk like that. It was just so unreal that you can't even have an aura of confidence that attracts attention or reinforces the feminine power.
Mm.
And when you grow up under this kind of societal norms and pressures, you either adapt or you rebel, revolt. And by nature, I'm rebellious in that way. But you also learn like how to do that. There's a point of rebellion that you can really get in trouble. And it's like
Mm.
finding that edge of how can I work this edge of pushing the envelope just enough that I don't get into a lot of trouble. So,
Mm.
at the time we think we're crafty and it's playful, especially as teenagers, we think it's fun, but we actually don't recognize the impact of that on our psyche, on our spirit, on our nervous system, to constantly be on the lookout to, it's also like there's a lot of assault happening in the streets, like against women. So it's when you walk on the street, you're like always assessing, is this person walking by me safe? Do I need to cross the street? Like, oh, is my hair showing? Am I laughing too much? Am I being too loud? There's so many restrictions that you have to work with to just simply function in the society. And that might be very alien to a Western, person who grew up here, but we have some versions of these also in Western societies that limit our expression. And as women, I mean, we've seen that, and it's really not that long ago that women gained the right to vote in this country. So there's a lot of restrictions, there's a lot of stereotypes also in this society that we have to adapt to, or what's acceptable here. So all the layers that in the society they impose upon us create this stress in the nervous system, and then we have to like find a way to respond to that. And in that response is our resilience, and that's the beauty of the human resilience, is that in that response we find that space where I can function and I can move forward and I can make sense of my current day reality, even if to an outside onlooker it's insane and oppressive. So we carry that in our nervous system, whether we recognize it or not, that, as we move through these experiences, my body and my nervous system saying, escape and run. And then this culture and the society is saying, no, you need to follow this, you need to stay in line. And what happens in that process is that in our nervous system, we experience a fight and flight. Like my nervous system is getting activated. I need to do something. I need to escape this, or I need to fight it. And when the society doesn't allow that and oppresses that opportunity, that is the classic definition of trauma. So when there's a lack of ability to fight or flight, so often I say, it doesn't matter what happened on the outside. Trauma is really, what happens on the inside. And so it doesn't matter whether I've been to a war zone or grew up there or a refugee camp. It doesn't really matter how big that outside experience was. What matters is that how did my body and nervous system respond to that? And the same is true here. In Western society, we have domestic violence, we have drug addiction, we have parents incarcerated, we have poverty, we have physical abuse, sexual abuse. There's all these layers that people grow up with. And all of this has an impact on our nervous system if we don't have the ability to fight or flight. So sometimes two people can go through the exact same experience, and one of them will walk out not traumatized because they were able to respond, and another will come out traumatized because they were not able to respond. And that energy gets stored in the nervous system. And what happens is that the nervous system stays in the state of activation and says, the world is not safe. And that is the challenge, is that initial challenge that all of a sudden a worldview changes and says, the world is no longer a safe place. And from there, then we have to adjust in all these different ways to create an artificial sense of safety for ourselves. And so the core premise of trauma work is around identifying those layers and deconstructing them.
It's interesting, as you're speaking, I was thinking of Wim Hof's work a little bit, just, which I'm not that versed in, but the concept of what I remember him saying is that we've become so comfortable. What I'm thinking is actually that someone who's been like cared for and in a world that is so comfortable that the nervous system hasn't necessarily had to go through things to strengthen its ability to respond to trauma can almost be traumatized more easily than someone who's grown up. I remember listening to someone say that the Sioux tribe used to take their 2-year-olds and they would start jumping into cold water by age 2. And that was to create warriors and to strengthen their nervous system so that their system wouldn't go into shock, because they trained their nervous system how to deal with the elements. And now, nowadays we have like literally food gets delivered to our door. We push a button on our phone. We don't really have to subject ourselves to much stress at all, even though we still do it internally. Many of us, in our own mind. It's so interesting to look at the dynamic of what that causes. When we look through society now, we have more people that are depressed than ever, even though they have a lot of luxuries that 100 years ago, like, things that we don't even think about, like running water and refrigerators, and we don't have to go, to get our water, or like our food won't go bad because we can freeze it for years in our freezer. Yet the experience for us is like, the world is coming to an end.
Yes, that's actually very accurate. and it goes into this concept of resiliency. Like, how do we
Mm.
develop resiliency? We develop resiliency by by controlled stress in the nervous system. And I don't even like the term stress, more like stretch. So I
Yep.
like the idea of stretching the nervous system. So when we stay in the stagnant space where everything's comfortable, provided safe, we actually don't develop a stronger capacity and resiliency for a bigger container to hold more energy, more of the stress without going into a state of overwhelm. So how the state of overwhelm happens is that we have a finite amount of capacity and a container size. So one is how much stress is in there and how much am I adding before it overflows and goes into a state of overwhelm. So one is like, how much is in there? Can I reduce it? Which is why we have the stress reduction techniques. But two is, can I increase the size of that container? And how you increase the size of that container is through working your edge.
Mm.
So finding where is that point of my edge where I'm providing enough of a challenge to my nervous system that it feels like a stretch, that stretching of my comfort zone, but not so much that I move into a state of stress. So there's a fine line, and for each person that's different. So there's no standard to say, oh, this is the standard or where we move into a state of overwhelm, but it's to say, oh, here I am. I'm noticing that I'm feeling challenged here, but it still feels like it's within my capacity to handle it, that I can move forward. This is why endurance training, a lot of times it's incrementally done. So it's like we do a little bit and we notice that point of stress and we take a step back. And that's the concept of self-regulation, which is the core premise of trauma work, especially in the somatic work that I do, is that recognizing what my self-regulation is, where is that point, and then being able to take a step back. And every time I do that, I can go a little bit further next time. So the analogy I provide is, imagine you have a really heavy desk and you want to push across a room, and you start pushing that desk and you're getting tired. Well, you have two options: keep pushing or pause and just recenter yourself, regain some strength, and do it again. And if you keep pushing, not only we're exerting a lot more energy, but we're increasing the chance of harm to our body, and we might never make it across the room. But if
Right.
I
'Cause
take a
like your
break and I
back or
balance it, then I'm like, I have more force, and then I take a break and I'm more force, and I go a little further each time. So that's the idea of how we expand the size of the containers, that we reach that edge and we stretch it. And as soon as I notice that stress, I take a step back. But unfortunately, in a highly productivity-based society like United States and a lot of Western societies, we're encouraged to find that edge and just keep pushing through, pushing through, pushing through. That works great if you're training for, a big, triathlon, is to like find your edge and push through. But in a day-to-day life, in your work, in your relationships, that's actually counterproductive.
And I'd say even in sports, it can be counterproductive. I played really intense sports as a child, and
Mm-hmm.
by age 17, I'd already blown my knee out. I had to have I had to have my ACL reconstructed. I ripped my MCL. I had been getting cortisone shots in my left calf muscle because it hurt so much for me because I was playing so much, growing
Mm-hmm.
up in that. So even in sports, you need to be careful because if you hurt yourself, you're not going to be playing anymore you know
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I feel like what is so essential to this discussion is the awareness of this, right? Because we go through these cycles anyway, and I think most people are aware that for growth you have to move into some form of like something uncomfortable because it's new, you don't know it, right? What we know is easy, like that I know how to brush my teeth. When you were a kid, you were like, ah, right? Like it was awkward at first. So we learn how to do things to become comfortable. And only when we're learning new things, we have to move somewhat into that uncomfort zone because we're actually growing new neurons and figuring out like the nervous system is like very alive and can grow and change and shift depending on how we change our patterns. But when
Mm-hmm.
we're not consciously aware of these things, we just go into a default and we don't even have necessarily the language or the systems, if we're the type of person that works well with systems or guidelines, to say, oh wow, I'm getting close to reaching like a max, or maybe I've already gone past, I've gone like a car engine, I've gone into the red, I'm already in overwhelm. This might be a good time for me to stop and then use the tools that I
Mm-hmm.
have.
Yeah. There you are.
Sorry.
Okay.
Um, so I just want to
Yeah.
pause there because so just so everyone knows, like, I love having the opportunity to speak with Anahita, and she's invited me to lead a retreat with her in the end of May. And then also you are leading on Wednesday. Will you talk a little bit, a free, what do we call it? A
Yeah.
master class,
It's a workshop.
webinar, workshop. Thank you.
Yeah.
Called Beyond Our Triggers. So you're
Yeah.
going to get like more specifically, we're not going to go into everything here. We're going to keep talking organically, but I think you're going to specifically, will you give us like some tools on what to look for and how to regulate, and I'll hand it to you. Here's the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. So next Wednesday, April 7th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and you can join online. It's a free workshop on Zoom. What we're going to be talking about is Beyond Our Triggers, a compassionate approach to personal and interpersonal healing. And we're going to go through an understanding of where our triggers come from, the neurobiology of our triggers, how that works in our nervous system, and then how do we find our grounding and disrupt this trigger patterns. So when I notice a trigger come up, how do I disrupt that pattern through somatic work? So specific practices that help calm the nervous system in the moment and disrupt that pattern. Then we're going to learn about what self-regulation is, which I briefly shared with you here, how to practice it, and also more importantly, what is co-regulation? That's really important, especially in this day and age. You're finding a lot of our triggers are up for us, especially in an interpersonal capacity. So part of this is about what is that co-regulation space? How do we ground together in a state of co-regulation using specific language that puts the story aside? And the story is the story. We can put the story aside and let's focus on bringing the body into a state of balance where it sees the possibilities. Doesn't mean that all our problems are solved, but that I have the capacity to access a state of possibility and resource myself and resource this conversation and relationship from a place of alignment and grounded presence, not from a place of high activation and trigger. Yeah,
Yeah.
powerful stuff, really critical for this
It
time.
is. It is. I'm so passionate about this stuff because I do truly believe for there to be, and so just to pause, for those of you who don't know, like Anahita and I get into a lot of conversations about activism and political stuff and, way beyond this. But I personally believe, actually, I posted a video of Biden and bombing, and she's like, well, what are you doing to give people a call to action to make change? And I thought, okay, fair enough. She's like, you don't need to terrify people that these bombs are going off. We all know it. It's like, yes, but we want to just remind people so it's in their consciousness. So I bring that up because when we look at the massive amount of change systematically that gets to happen on this planet so that we can truly move into a harmonious balance between, like, the way I look at it, like the cosmos, the earthly plane, and then, like, coming back from Egypt, you have the three realms, right? You have the cosmos, our connection to the stars, understanding how that we are only a small being in a much larger moving of a huge solar system and galaxy and universe. And then also, like, the underworld, which is the planet, right? What's under us. We as humans are the guardians and the bridge between these two worlds. And we're here to be and live in harmony, ideally, with each other and with the world. And that's, in order for that to happen, for systems, what I believe, for systems to be incorruptible, the only way that happens is when the humans that are, like, anchoring those systems in are incorruptible. And if you do not have control, if you're not living one with conscious intent, and I'll bring that back to the tool of how that has helped me with regulating my nervous system, is having a conscious intent. And what that looks like is I have made a choice as best as I can to be, to radiate love, which means, hey, if I'm driving, and this is actually a very real experience. I was driving, the guy behind me didn't make the left turn at the left signal. When he finally did, my window was open. It was a summer day, just all types of profanities that he screamed into my window, you blah, 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 blah. And I just, I had been practicing at that time, like, deregulating my nervous system. I also was on a regular routine of CBD, which also I think kept me more chill. And so I looked at him, and every part of me that would have just, fought back or said something, I just went, and smiled. And when we stopped at the red light, at the next red light, I pulled up next to him and I said, hey, you know, it's not because of me. It was the person ahead of me that was on their phone. And that's why you didn't make the turn. And just lovingly saying that to him, he turned and he looked at me and he said, I am so sorry for speaking to you that way. But that was an example of saying, okay, here is my nervous system. Everything in my nervous system wants to go into fight and punch this person in the face or spit in his face. But my intent to like, even when people throw anger at me or throw this, I make a conscious effort of doing the work to turn that in. So as much as I have the capacity to, I'm emanating love and I'm transmuting energies into the energies that I want to be contributing to the world. Right. And that's even, I've gotten to practice that on social media when I get triggered and someone writes something and I watch myself write something kind of nasty back or like something from a power perspective. Sometimes I'll get texts from people and I immediately will be like, well, you'll hear for my lawyers. And then like, wait a second. Is that being the most loving, wonderful human being? Or is that a total power trip, right? So I stop and I delete the text. And so, like, you know, for me, one of the tools that's been really powerful beyond understanding all the things that you'll be teaching us, because in my own practice of like, and I went through school and I studied anatomy and just got to learn a lot of this stuff, not necessarily because I was even actively choosing out, it just sort of happened on my path. I almost, until Anahita and I really got in this conversation, take a lot of that information for granted and realize not everyone has gotten exposed to how their central nervous system works. What are the parts of the spinal cord and the different parts of the brain, and what are we conscious of and what are we not conscious of? What's the difference between a sensory or a motor neuron? And when we understand this stuff, we have such a vast awareness of how we work. And then when we couple it with an intent of this is how I'm going to use this system to contribute, you know, with my life force in the time that I'm here on the planet, having that strong intent for me of like, I choose to be love. I choose to be love. I want to be a more loving person in this world has given me the strength when I can even logically go like, oh my gosh, this thing's triggered and that thing's triggered. I just want to like, oh, okay, I'm just breathing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to walk away now. I'll come back and we'll have this discussion later. You know? Whatever your tool is.
Kindest thing you can do, you know, that is the core premise of co-regulation.
Yeah.
Is that when we learn to regulate our nervous system, then we can much easier, with more capacity, hold another person's possibility of them finding that regulation in their nervous system. And that we can use specific language to help them find their center. So instead of feeding the story, we don't have to agree to be co-regulated. You and I don't always agree on things. We're always co-regulating. We're always co-regulating. And how do we actually do that is that I take responsibility for the state of my nervous system, and I hold the possibility for your nervous system to find its stability as well, knowing that we're both a lot more conscious and capable and effective when we come from a place of balance and alignment in our nervous system versus a place of activation or collapse in our nervous system. So in this workshop, we're not going to go too deep into it, but we will talk about these 3 different levels based on the polyvagal theory of our ventral, our state of possibility and safety in our nervous system, our sympathetic, not necessarily all fight or flight. Some of it is good. Some of it is like just me running a marathon. And some of it is also the dorsal state, that state of collapse and not really seeing the sense of possibility. So knowing these states and being able to identify where I am across each of those states, and then having the tools to bring myself back into a state of ventral possibility and safety, and then reapproach and recognize, oh, is the story still valid? Do I still need to feed it? Do I need to still tend to it? Yes, let's go. No, then a lot of times it's just an old trigger or a misunderstanding. And once we balance the nervous system, we recognize that we don't even need to go there anymore.
Right.
So, yeah.
Can you just speak a little bit, because you threw in a few more technical terms out in that last one, ventral, dorsal, and then the polyvagal. Would you just share a little bit on that? Because, you know, for those people who haven't had anatomy, or this might be their first time in this type of conversation of their nervous system, there's no reference for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll cover this in the workshop more,
Yeah.
but essentially, the polyvagal theory is a theory that was presented something like 25 years ago that suggests that our nervous system isn't as simplified as we think. Oh, here is the rest and digest, fight or flight, and freeze. And even the freeze came later. But what we're saying is that this theory says that there is entire states of our nervous system that encompass a range of thought processes and physical sensations. And so the polyvagal theory is about recognition that we do move in between these states. We're not saying that you should stay in one state, but it's that ventral, the space of safety, balance, calming, possibility, resourcefulness, hope, all of that is our home base. And that can get disrupted. That can be completely convoluted because of trauma. It can be disrupted because of adult onset of trauma or stressful life experiences. But we often move out of that. It's just part of nature. It's how our nervous system protects us, is that we move into these other states. And it's not, none of these states are labeled bad or good. It's just that they're not the home base. So we each have a dominant home away from home. Some of it is, most people have it in sympathetic. So when I'm out of alignment, I'm more readily moving into a state of mobility. There's no engagement, social engagement in a state of mobility. It's almost like a fight or flight, or just like a hyper-focus state of movement. So that is the sympathetic, where there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of motion. So it's characterized as motion. And then there's the third state of freeze, which some individuals more readily move into a state of dorsal, or freeze is within dorsal. And some move more readily into sympathetic. Dorsal is more like completely disengaged from the world, completely disengaged from spirit, from self, feeling numb, feeling collapsed, not seeing any possibility. So that is a state of deep depression, whereas the sympathetic is more associated with strong anxiety. And so these are the different levels. We move up and down, and there are different spectrums also, like how deep am I in one state or another, recognizing through our physical cues where we are, through our mind and thought processes. How am I perceiving? What's the story right now I'm holding about myself? What's the story I'm right now holding about the world? And those often will give us a pretty good compass of where we are in our nervous system, because from the outside, they might seem really calm. But from the inside, if the thought that I'm holding is that I am not lovable, this world isn't a safe place, you can't trust anyone, danger is around the corner, then it doesn't matter how calm I look and how many practices I have and how many breathing exercises I do. If I'm holding that story, I'm still not in a ventral state. So a lot of this work is about identifying where I am and then using specific techniques to find myself back into a state of balance in my autonomic nervous system. And then from that space of balance, then I can see possibility. And don't we all rather address problems and engage from a place of possibility than a place of disengagement and distrust?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
You have, I come back to, I don't know what your time is for this also. I just want to like be aware, if you at any point you need to jump off, just let me know. Give me a few minutes.
Okay. Thank
Otherwise
you.
I might keep questioning you. But I think of this one statement, which when I heard it, it just has resonated in my being, which is the person who has the most conscious awareness of their breath is the predominant organizing field in any room. So I love that, being a breathwork practitioner, and still always like, how many of us actually are conscious of every single breath that we take? But as soon as we can become aware of these things interplay so much, like, oh, I feel sort of some anxiety. What's my breath look like? Oh, let me shift my breath. Let me come back to that home state that you're speaking of and embody those possibilities. And then what you also spoke to earlier that I love, which relates to this quote, is once I can do that consciously and have the skill set to notice when I've gone out of the home base without judging it, bring myself back there if that's the place that I choose to be in at that moment. And then anchor it so efficiently that it then creates that possibility and actually entrains other people's nervous systems, right? Because we have this
Mm-hmm.
mirroring effect as humans. So once you can actually hold that in a strong way, you allow that to then sort of, for lack of a better word, seep, or almost like that resonance to create a possibility for everyone else. And it can bring the entire room to that same vibration or that same state of safety. And then you can make really awesome stuff happen. Because again, like we were sharing, when you're in a group of people co-creating, it's not that people are not going to get triggered. It's just simply, how aware are we that we are triggered? Are we willing to put our defenses down if someone else maybe points out, perhaps you're a little bit triggered right now? Like, do we go like, no, I'm not triggered? Or do we say, okay, let me look at that. Let me sit with the discomfort in my nervous system. Let me use my tools and then be able to re-engage. So we're not judging the trigger, you know, we get,
Mm-hmm.
accept that everyone gets triggered. Let's all collectively learn how to move through our triggers, so that we can be co-creating as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And for those people who aren't triggered, they can, even if they're not saying anything, they just become this resonance to
Mm.
recalibrate the room to that state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You definitely have mirror neurons, and how we show up in an exchange definitely impacts the other in that exchange. And I've found this throughout long periods of time of practice with some loved ones, is that sometimes it takes time, that we keep showing up at some certain frequency, we keep showing up at a certain frequency, and over time we notice that change. But as we learn how to regulate ourselves and we learn to co-regulate together, part of this is recognizing that we all have different triggers, and triggers shall not be judged, because a
Mm,
lot of this is all rooted in our background. Very, very often, 9 out of 10 times, this comes from our childhood experiences, developmental trauma, where
mhm,
our worldview was changed. So it's like we have different lenses on when there's trauma. We don't see the world in the same way when you come from a background that has been traumatized. So part of this is recognizing that some of our triggers we might be able to move through over time if they had less force at the time of impact. Some of them not so much. So then we have to learn, how do I compassionately move through my own triggers, befriend them, see them not as curse, but as an invitation, as an opportunity, and be able to hold that same space for another person, and recognizing that we have variations of cultural, racial, gender experiences that give us different types of triggers. So just because somebody's getting triggered, the label of, oh, you're so sensitive, it's actually not kind or compassionate or helpful. It is most helpful when we become aware and we master understanding of where triggers come from. And I don't need the story. And this is the beauty of the somatic trauma work that I do, is that we don't need to know the story. All we need to know is that, what are you experiencing right now in your nervous system, and how do we
mhm,
support you to move into a state of balance?
mhm. I
Yeah.
just want to notice, Ebony, maybe I'm saying that correctly, was saying that in Zen, they called that state of like holding that space being the boss. And that in monasteries, they rub their ear to let others know that they are triggered. So, you know, you're like,
Whoa, this is really powerful. My God. So I have to tell you, okay, you get a little like sneak peek, because there's an entire exercise around rubbing your earlobe as a way of disrupting your neural pathways of triggers.
oh, there you go.
So
See?
what we know is that touch sensation, and anytime we activate any of our five senses and we put our focus on, and the more of the five senses we activate at the same time, the better it is. What we do know is that a hyper focus in our senses immediately regulates the nervous system and sends
Mm,
a signal to the nervous system to completely calm down, calms the amygdala, which is our alarm center in the body that sets all of anxiety activities in motion. And what we do is, my earlobe is one of my favorites. Is that when I rub my earlobe, you go ahead and rub your earlobe, you'll notice few things. You're noticing sound. So that's one sensation. You're noticing temperature, another
mm,
sensation. You're noticing texture, that's another sensation. So there's three sensations activated at the same time. And if you keep your focus, the moment you find yourself triggered, you would have to put, you can't do it right now because you're paying attention to me, but practice to see what it feels like. But in the moment of trigger, if you continue rubbing that and putting 100% of your focus for a minimum of 40 seconds or so on the sensations, the sound, the temperature, it instantly regulates your nervous system. So these are one of the ways that we can disrupt those patterns. And what happens is that over time, because these neurons are so well practiced for so long that it takes time to break them. But the more we practice breaking that pattern, we're actually weakening that trigger. And over time, there is hope that it will be less prevalent in our lives. I can't for sure say that it will go away, but I can say that it will be less prevalent, less impactful.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've actually been on that note. I've been doing, I just watch like a minute a day because there's so many pressure points. Like in acupuncture, you can actually treat your whole body through your ear. So even just going like this underneath the fold of the ear and then behind the ear, it's like basically giving your whole nervous system a massage, like calming it down,
Yeah.
I can't help myself. I have such a vivid imagination. And I was like, well, what if Anahita, you said like you're paying attention to me right now, so you can't totally do it. I thought, well, what if Anahita was to trigger me and then I can practice this live on Instagram? And then I just thought of myself like when I'm triggered, like in a conversation, let's say with my mom or something, and being like,
20 seconds, be like, oh, hold on 1 second, and put it on mute and go at it. Or you go to the
it
bathroom.
kind of like makes you think of like, when you're like, not listening to you. I'm just gonna massage my ears, not listening.
Can always count on the humor from you, Nada. I love it. I just love it. Yeah, bringing the lightheartedness. Well, laughter, by the way, laughing together is a co-regulation technique.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're all co-regulating together right now.
We are.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to throw into the combo while we're here?
Well,
or if
a few
anyone
things
has
that
any
are happening. Yeah, please, like
let me
add your
just scroll
questions
and see if we
here.
missed any questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some water.
Someone asked if we are twins. We are soul twins. Let's see. Okay, no specific questions that we haven't touched on. So if anyone on here wants to ask the question, you're more than welcome.
Well, I'll share with you guys a little bit about my background and then a couple cool things that are happening besides the workshop. So my background is integrative trauma therapy. And so I take a bottom-up approach. All of my work starts from the body.
Your earring is hitting on your mic again.
It's happening again.
Yes.
There it is. It moved out.
Perfect.
Okay, there we go. Thanks. My background is in integrative trauma therapy. What that means is that I have a vast toolbox of sets of practices and that I have acquired throughout the years. And when I work with individuals, which I firmly believe that almost all of our anxiety or depression or trouble focusing or insomnia, they're associated with an event. Maybe it's one event, maybe it's a series of events. And sometimes we don't characterize them as trauma, but they are. If they're small and they're consecutive, they can have a very similar effect as trauma on our nervous system. Based on that premise, my work is very much a bottom-up approach. That means I work with the body. And sometimes we get to the mind, but most of the work really happens from the body and bringing balance to the body as a way of bringing balance to the mind. And through that practice, I work with different sets of practices. I employ trauma release exercises, which work in shaking and activating neurogenic tremors, which are involuntary shakes that get you to discharge any energy of stress, trauma, accidents of the past. Works really well with anxiety, depression, trauma, and also chronic pain. It's a really effective practice. I also work with an incredibly powerful, innovative technique called the Safe and Sound Protocol. And the Safe and Sound Protocol essentially are a series of highly treated music audio files. It's not sound healing, but music audio files that we listen to over the course of 5 to 15 hours that's designed to modify the middle ear muscle. What we've learned is that trauma alters the middle ear muscle by prioritizing
Wow.
lower frequency sounds, which are associated with predatory sounds, over higher frequency sounds. So individuals with trauma and autism and ADHD have actually difficulty hearing the lower frequency human sounds and deciphering them from the sounds in the environment. So individuals with high sound sensitivity are very attuned to what that's like to live with that. And so sometimes we don't even notice we have, and this shows up not always as sound sensitivity, it shows up as light sensitivity because it's connected to our optic nerve as well. So it shows up as sound sensitivity, light sensitivity, textile sensitivity, certain fabrics we can't wear, certain tastes or smells, difficulty swallowing. So these are all connected to the dysfunction in the middle ear. And the system is designed completely passively to modify and release that middle ear from that state of high activation for trauma into a state of balance. And that's connected directly to our vagus nerve, our facial muscles, and that regulates our heart rate. So it's really powerful practice, and there's a ton of peer-reviewed research on it. So that's another technique that I use. I also work with microdosing plants, and so I provide protocols, like custom create and design protocols that involve different types of supplements, including microdose supplements, to help support the balance, the nervous system into a state of wholeness. I work with sound. I work with breath therapies, which you're very accustomed to and aware of. So that's kind of the bottom-up approach. And then from there, we work with the cognitive behavioral layer, which is identifying all the parts of our nervous system and our identity that are still in survival mode. So noticing where we're still in survival, where we're still holding on to that layer that we needed to take on, that extra identity, that extra adjustment that we're talking about earlier as a result of our environment to function, and then noticing that those are not needed anymore. So first bringing that sense of safety to the nervous system, and then being like, oh, is that needed still? Once I have safety, maybe I don't need that armor. Maybe I don't need that layer of protection. And maybe I don't need that, because over time, what we don't realize is that what we think is our gift is actually a sabotage layer. So we think, oh, being a perfectionist, hyperachiever, hypervigilant, all these layers are gifts. Oh, this is where I'm here, but it's not actually. It's how we survive for long periods of time. And if it no longer serves you, if you're in a state of safety now in your nervous system, then we can dissect those layers and slowly let them go. So that's kind of the process that I work with. And we have a couple events coming up to do this. And so if you're interested in the practice of microdosing and you don't know where to start, you want some tips, I have a weekly digest. The website's going to get launched soon, but you can go to microdoseguru.com and you can set up and
Can you write it in there in the comments for
Yeah,
everyone?
I'll write
And
that
while you're
here.
doing that, I just want to share something. Put all your information in there just so that everyone can see it. And then I'll also put it when we do this. I'll make this an IGTV. But as you're talking, I realize that you and I have a similarity, which is we developed defense mechanisms to be highly independent women. And both of us had massive physical breakdowns before we were able to realize how embedded that was. For me, and I'll let you speak a little bit to your experience, but I also watched what you went through. I had no awareness of that until I broke my face. And then not only did I have my face broken, I went to a friend who is a shaman, and he said, your spirit guides just say, do a fundraiser and raise the money. I had health insurance, but I still needed to come up with a lot of money while I was going through all these surgeries and extra money for covering my deductibles and these things. He's like, your spirit guides say, just do a fundraiser and ask people for help. And I refused. I went through most of the surgeries. I went through all of my savings until one day I woke up with literally negative $250 in my bank account. And I was brought to my knees. And then I called all my friends that had money, will you lend me $5,000? Because at the time I needed that to get for the deposit into my next surgery. And all of them said, no, but if you do a GoFundMe, I will give you money. And I was like, I have to publicly announce that I need help. And the universe just wrestled me until finally I was like, uncle, okay, fine. And I put the GoFundMe, the donation page up. And within 5 minutes of me releasing it, people just started donating with these messages of you've shown up for me this way. And it broke my wall of I have to do everything by myself. And I didn't even know that wall was there And it just was like, oh,
Yeah.
people love me and they want to help me. And oh my
Mm,
God, I didn't realize growing up as a New Yorker with a single mom that I was like, I don't need anybody. I can take care of myself. I think
right.
that you have some similarities a little bit in your story as
Yeah, it's
well.
very,
You
very
know?
common actually. It's a very common response to trauma is hyper independence. And
Mm-hmm.
so becoming, and there are few characteristics. I really don't like labeling these things, but it does help for us to kind of identify a spectrum of what's happening. And it doesn't mean this is your identity. It just means this is what you needed to do to survive at the time. It doesn't mean this is who you are. But some of those survival mechanisms look like controlling, like needing to control a lot of things, perfectionism. So I have to do it all perfect or it's just not going to work. I'm not going to be accepted or loved. Hyperachieving. So if I continue in this performance, then I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of acceptance. I can be received. And some of that is also this hyper independence of just like, I don't need anyone. I've been disappointed, so I don't need any of this. I don't need anybody. I'm going to figure all of this out. And that here's what we know is that as mammals, connection is a core need, and we need each other to co-regulate. All mammals need each other to co-regulate. And so this isolation to pull ourselves back and say, I'm going to do this all by myself is actually a trauma response that perpetuates the trauma. And so it puts us in a state of anxiety, ADHD. So these are some of the ways it shows up. Chronic pain, the most prevalent. I've never worked, and that doesn't mean that this is the rule. I personally have never worked with a chronic pain client that wasn't a type A individual.
Mm, that's
So a lot of this is a lot of pressure on our nervous system of have to do, have to perform, have to do, have to perform. And a society that promotes that and rewards that, it becomes really hard to say that's a problem. We see it
mm,
as like, this is my advantage. Yeah,
yeah. Awesome. So
yeah.
go on. I mean, I told that story and you're typing the information. So everyone who is actually live on here, Anahita has put the microdoseguru.com and also anahitaanais.com, which where you can contact her and get more information about the retreat that we are doing on May 28th to May 31st,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, is that where you want people to go to sign up for Wednesdays?
Yeah, so if
Taylor?
you go on my website, there under events, you'll see two events. It's also linked from my IG. You can go on my IG short link and you can be linked to all of these. What you'll find there are two events. One of them is Beyond Our Triggers, a free workshop next Wednesday. And you'll also see the Metamorphosis event, which is the tonic for your nervous system. Over 3 days, it's curated experiences that we bring some amazing practitioners like Nada together, and we provide a really beautiful, safe container for only 8 individuals, and we're halfway full. So we only have room for 4 more, and so we're taking in applications. We can't receive all of you, but we'll receive some of you, and for those of you that we can't receive, we'll do another one another time. But this one's going to be really powerful. So if you're feeling bogged down by the pandemic, you need something to feel balanced in your nervous system, to let go of all of that tension and stress of the past year, to find hope in community and celebration, this is a perfect place to do that. And you'll get a really good preview of all the different services that is within the offering of all the practitioners that are going to be there. So it's a really beautiful experience deep in the mountains of Idlewild, and we'll love to have you.
Yay! Abdi wants to sign up his girlfriend. So go to you can click on Anahita's Instagram and all the information's there, and we'd love to meet your girlfriend. And as well as I just want to share, it's great for all of us, even if we feel like we're fine and not traumatized, to take time like this, because I find for myself every time I do these practices, I release layers, and that allows me to what I call expand my bandwidth, right, of my nervous system, which, my passion is around leadership. So even if you're
Mhm.
not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm totally overworked, or I'm totally don't know how to do with my what to do with my nervous system, as you can see, Anahita is a wealth of wisdom here. She's a highly intelligent person, and I've watched her dedicate the last few years of her life to studying this stuff so intensely, which is why I'm, even though I'm a co-facilitator, excited to be there, because I know how much I'm going to be learning. So for those of you who are like moving into and inspired to move into states of leadership, understanding this stuff is essential to working with groups, you know, and
Absolutely.
helping us collectively get to where we are going together as a human family. So that's
Hmm.
another reason that will be there. I will be like leading breath work and talking about some of that stuff from the yogic philosophy and Vedic philosophies, as well as other little tidbits that I will be throwing in there where, you know, we'll see what spews forth from my channel. Um,
So excited. Can't
and
wait.
then we have sound healing as well.
Yes,
So
we have sound healing, we have hikes, we've got a shaking trauma release session where you learn how to shake trauma and stress off of your nervous system. We'll have a workshop on befriending your nervous system where we go really deep into giving you the tool sets that you need to be able to respond in a day to day to the stressors of life. We do have a ritual experience, ceremonial experience that we'll be sharing with you with live music and movement and dance. We have a hike, we have yoga meditation and vegan meals. So
yeah,
it's going to be really awesome.
it is. I'm very
Yeah.
excited. Great. Hi, Liz. Liz just joined. Happy to see you. And you know, Liz actually is a wonderful body talk practitioner. So I will also be
Mm.
teaching there's some very basic body talk. Someone asked me, I put on a question on my stories, like, what are my favorite healing modalities? And body talk is one of them. And it has a few really specific things that we can do to harmonize our right and left uh, cortices of our brain. And these are things that I'll be teaching during the retreat as well. Just basic things to help, again, expand our bandwidth. So like, so that we can actually be able to, the brain has a place where enough amount of stress hits us, it just shuts off. I'm sure we've all done that. You study a certain point, you just kind of go like, I can't take any more information. So there are actually techniques that body talk teaches to like gradually, like we talk, sort of stretching that space to allow the brain and the nervous system to go to greater and greater levels of information coming in before it just shuts off. So
Yeah,
that's another technique that we'll be teaching. And yeah, so many goodness and goodies, and just simply being in nature cannot be
it's
under
amazing.
spoken,
Yeah, yeah,
because nature itself recalibrates us
yeah.
to our natural state.
Hmm. I'm
Yay!
excited. I can't wait.
Me
And thank you
too.
for hosting me here
Yeah,
and co-facilitating this beautiful, magical retreat
my
together. And thank you to all your audience that's joined in and all the lovely comments and encouragements that's been coming through in the past hour. And just so grateful to be here. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Liz, I need to know you. I
she's
need to know
awesome.
you.
I'll
I
introduce
know,
you.
sounds like it because a lot of
Yeah,
what you're talking about is in alignment with the somatic work that I do and some of the practices that I learned through chronic pain coaching work that I did years ago. So we'd love to connect with you.
and then also for all of you who are on here and didn't get any of the websites or anything, just DM me and I'll send you all the links.
Yeah, and they're all also on my bio. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank
Yay! Have a beautiful,
you.
blessed day. Spread
You
your love into
too.
the world. Happy
I love you.
regulated nervous system is what it's all. Bye.
Done. Bye.